sweetheart. Thank you, Mike, for leading us tonight. He was so right on to share 2 Timothy 2:2. There was a man that used to be a member of this church, and the only reason I didn't tell that or use that text tonight, Mike, is because he was a fellow that many people know, longtime president at Manhattan Christian College. His name was Wilford Lown, and he used to attend Park Plaza. Some of you might go back that far with the church, and he said that 2 Timothy 2:2 was Paul's Great Commission. I like that. I think that's really right. I could tell you a personal little story about when some of our heritage in 1968 voted in Kansas City under what they called restructure. That was a significant moment in our tribe's church history where one group of our people kind of went theologically left and other people kind of stayed where they are, like us and our Church of Christ a cappella friends. But in 1968 in Kansas City, there was a vote taken among our Disciple of Christ friends, and the vote was that they would be part of what was called restructure. This is a lot of church history kind of stuff. But there were two men in the state of Kansas that voted against that because they thought it would hurt the church. One of them was Wilford Lown, and one of them was named Bob Scott. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Well, if you have observed two little grandkids running around this church building some, whose names are Asa and Naomi, they happen to belong to Gaga and Papa as their grandparents, and they get around Park Plaza some. They love to eat at fun places. Now let me define what fun means. Fun means that the restaurant needs to have a jungle gym. Fun means that it's got to be like Chick-fil-A, where they can kick off their shoes and run through the area, or Burger King, or back in the day, McDonald's. They like to go to fun places to eat because they can have fun. And one of the places we've taken them a couple times is Pizza Ranch. This is not a commercial. We're not all that crazy about it. But anyway, they like to go to Pizza Ranch because Pizza Ranch has a fun zone. Have you been to Pizza Ranch? So the chicken, the pizza, but the kids can hardly get their dinner down because they want to get back there and do video games and shoot water at targets. And Pizza Ranch has a fun zone. I don't want to talk to you about the fun zone tonight. I want to talk to you about the exchange zone. This is a baton, in case you don't know, but it's not like you direct music with it. You slap it in somebody else's hand, and they run the race. The exchange zone in field and track is about, depending on the race, 20 meters, which would be around 22 yards, or 30 meters for longer races. But you pass the baton in the exchange zone to somebody else for them to run their leg of the race. Now, at Park Plaza Christian Church, we just happen to have a very famous track star, in case you didn't know. And so I want Miss Patty Vavra to come up here right now. We just think of Patty as Patty. We just think of Patty as our church custodian. And so, but she's so much more than that. Though in her humility, she's very glad for the title. Can you get that on? So I want to just take a minute or two to interview Patty here. You got it? No. Yes. Okay. And I'm going to just mention to you a little bit about this lady's history. She grew up here at this church. And if I remember from what Miss Betty told me, had something to do with the Johnson family, kind of got the family, Sarah and you, coming here to Park Plaza, Helen and J.D. Johnson, right? Because they lived close by. And away the family came to Park Plaza. Well, this lady was really fast. Okay? And so, anyway, growing up here in the church, growing up in the Joplin area, did you like other sports besides track and field?
Oh, I liked all sports.
All
I
sports.
played basketball and played some softball in the summers.
Okay, softball and basketball, good. And but track and field, that was kind of a favorite.
It ended up being my real niche,
Okay.
at least in the
Okay. All right.
in my career. For
And
sure.
so, tell us what events you participated in track and field. What were some of the ones that you remember?
Mostly the sprints and the hurdles. So I ran the 100-meter hurdles, the 100, the 200, once in a while the 400, all the relays.
Okay.
Did a little long jumping, a little javelin throwing in college.
You threw the javelin? I always wanted to be a javelin catcher. Anyway.
Not a good position.
No, not
Mark.
a good position to take. Okay, so wow. Do ladies, I'm just showing my ignorance, do ladies have like high hurdles and low hurdles, or just one set of hurdles? I
They're
don't
a
know.
little higher in the 100-meter than they are in the 400-meter.
Okay. This is still something, Wilma, I'm taking by faith, but your husband ran the high hurdles, Mel Walbridge?
Yeah.
I wish I had film of that. I really, really do. That would be something. But he did, right? He really did. And so you ran the hurdles, okay. Of all the events that you ran in track and field, did you have a few events that were favorites that you liked running better than some?
The shortest ones.
The shortest one? How many of you would vote for that? Run the shortest race. Yeah.
No, I love the relays, though, and I know we're going to talk about that
Okay,
because
yeah.
it's the one event in track and field that's team-oriented. You actually
True.
get to work with your teammates, and you get to practice with them, and it really becomes a lot about teamwork.
So track and field can be a great individual sport, but the relays really underline the team idea for sure. You may not know this, but she was the first woman athlete at Missouri Southern State University to receive a scholarship, a woman's scholarship. And she went on to succeed in that and coached in Carthage and coached at her alma mater, Missouri Southern State University, and she's on the board for Koinonia with David Weaver. So she's contributed that way. And if you don't know, she's in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. How about that? So that's pretty great. Well, you mentioned the relay, and of course, as I told you, we are going to talk about this tonight. So here's the baton. Show us a couple of the ways, how does this exchange work? Because I was only in the fat man's relay. Just how do you do this? Like I see people put their hand back here and they slap it. I see different. Show us how this is done.
There's several different ways, but if
Okay.
you're running more of a distance event, you're going to take a visual exchange, and because the exchange shortness of the time is not as important as a sprint relay, but most of us see the sprint relays, and you're usually going to take a non-visual exchange, which means that I can either put my hand with my thumb down and back, and Mark pushes it straight in. Some may put their hand like this and they take it up underneath.
Okay.
Or there's some that do more of a weird exchange anymore. I'm not even going to show you that one. But probably the key factor is, to me, is that the incoming runner, the person bringing the baton to the next one, has to make sure that they finish. And their responsibility really is not let loose of that baton until they've passed it to the next person. The outgoing runner, on the other hand, can't just stand there in the same place, or that incoming runner will run over them. So they have to take that lead out, and it takes a lot of practice to figure out what that right lead out is, and they have to put their hand back at the right time, and they have to make sure they grab that baton. So.
And you have, in each of those relays, a certain zone. You got to get that handed off, or you get penalized, or you get disqualified,
That's
or
right,
something.
20 meters, and so if you
Yeah.
exchange it before or after that 20-meter
Okay.
exchange zone,
Okay.
then it's a disqualification for your team.
The big question, did you ever drop it?
Don't do that, Mark.
Oh.
No, I
You never dropped it?
and our teams never dropped it.
I was going to ask if any of the people you coached ever dropped it.
No, it took
In
a lot
rega-
of preaching.
Huh?
It took a lot of preaching to keep them from doing that.
You're crowding in on my discipline? Okay. Now, very important to pass this well. That's what you're underlining. Did you ever, any memorable moments in the passing of the baton that you thought, oh man, are we going to make this? And then it worked out, or whatever?
Yes, I can remember a young lady starting, the outgoing runner got away from her a little bit. She was really reaching to hand that off, and she ended up falling. But as she fell, she held on to that baton and still exchanged it to the next young lady.
That'll preach right there. We're going to, okay, thank you, Patty. Give it up for Patty and helping us tonight with this. Yeah, wouldn't you have liked to seen that? That the runner was falling down, but wanted to make sure, had a good handoff of the baton in the exchange zone. Well, I'm not real smart, but I know if you drop it, you'll probably lose the race. That's what I want to talk to you about tonight. Because in these messages, in these months, on the second Sunday night of the month where we have a preaching night, we're trying to kind of get us ready for November and the 65th anniversary of our church. And we're asking questions like, wow, look at the race that's been run for 65 years. But what about the next 65 years? How can we ensure that the baton of faith will be passed to the people that will sit here in the years to come? How do we ensure that? How does that get done? And so the first night, we talked about a peek into Park Plaza's future. I told you, I'm not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. I work for a nonprofit. So I don't know where we're going. And the elders don't know where we're going, and the deacons don't know where. But it's just an effort to say, well, what, if we peeked into some kind of crystal ball, or what would we find? And then a few Sunday nights back, we talked about the Word and the words. And the last song we sang that Bert led us in before the preaching was Ancient Words, which is a newer, ready? Hymn, 2001. Ancient words, ever true, changing me, changing you. But how can they change you if you don't know what they mean? So we talked about that because we want to have an informed faith. It's still faith. It goes beyond knowledge. But we want it to be informed. And so we want to know what the words of the Bible mean. So tonight, I want to develop still more of this theme by talking about the exchange zone. Here's what I'd like to do. I would like to just give a cluster of Bible passages tonight. And we're going to start in the New Testament, not the Old Testament. Although I'm going to trick you just a bit. I'm going to put an Old Testament text in the New Testament section. And I have a reason for doing that. But when you just cluster these together, just kind of like we did in the other message, just what are some passages, hopefully not taking these out of context, this is a topical type of message. What are some passages that come to mind? Certainly what Mike mentioned earlier, 2 Timothy 2:2, the things you've heard from me, entrust to reliable men who will be able to teach others also. That's a great passing of the baton passage. From Paul to Timothy, from Timothy to the elders, from the elders to the future generations of the Ephesus church. But I want to deal with some other passages tonight, and so we'll just quickly put these on the screen for you. But one of the things you want to do when you run a race is, well, you'd like to finish. I have a cousin named Steve Grice, and Steve wanted to run in the Boston Marathon back when he preached out in New Hampshire. He preached in Manchester, New Hampshire for a little while. I can tell you this kind of funny story. Things here in the Bible Belt we just kind of take for granted. And so he announced to his church that we're going to have a potluck supper. They'd never had a potluck supper before. Just, a basket dinner, a share. And people said, well, what is this? Will you bring enough food for, like your family would need, and we share it? And so he announced that, and people brought food, and the leaders had a little meeting while they were getting the dinner ready. And when he came down into the basement there, back in the old building of Manchester Christian Church, all the families who had brought their food were sitting at their own tables, eating their own food. And they thought, what's the point of this? We could have done this at home. And he said, oh, you people out of the Bible Belt, you don't know anything. You share it on a common table. You get everybody else to eat your food, so bring stuff that you don't like. Anyway, but Steve ran in the Boston Marathon at one point. And he said he had 3 goals. One was to finish. That's a good goal. 2 was to beat at least one girl. And, he had these goals. Well, I just want to say, first of all, that one of the goals you want to have is to finish the race. Races are won not when the gun sounds. Races are won at the tape. So from the get-go, you determine, I'm not going to let anything hinder me from running. So we have a passage like 2 Timothy 4:7. It's such a great passage. Paul in verses 6-8 is predicting his future. I'm being poured out like a drink offering. I know the time of my departure has come. That Greek word means like a ship sailing over the horizon and finally just disappears. And he says this, I have fought the good fight. That's the first metaphor. Listen to the second one. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. You need to decide that before you start running. It's like a couple in high school who want to keep themselves pure for their marital partner. You don't decide that on a date some night in the back seat. You decide that before you ever go on the date. And that's the same thing here. My friend Alan Algram, who has gone on to be with Jesus now, Alan would say, it's always too soon to quit. So you want to finish the race. And the second thing about this is you realize the possibility, given the limitations of our flesh, that we could lose. You run with the intent that you could lose. When the Broncos took the field against the 49ers last night and won 30-9, but that's not important. Somebody, thank you, Sherry. You both went with the way it started out with Bo Nix getting a safety against him. Seriously? The potential is to lose. Here's the thing. In Galatians, in 2 passages, and one in Philippians, where Paul's talking about doctrine, right thing. I'm surprised that you're so quickly turning from that which is really the gospel. We read these words in Galatians 2:2. I went up, Paul's talking about going up to Jerusalem to meet with the big boys, and set before, because of revelation, God told him to go up, and set before them, though privately, before those who seemed influential, like Peter and the other apostles, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running and had not run in vain. You recognize, if we're not careful, we could lose this race. And we sure don't want to lose this race. I don't want anybody in Park Plaza Christian Church 50 years from now to get doctrinally messed up. You know the only way we keep that from happening? We keep preaching Bible doctrine. That's what we do. And he goes on to say much the same thing. In Galatians 5, verse 7, you were running well. First he's talking about himself. Now he's talking about the church. These churches in Galatia, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? So we recognize we could lose. Philippians 2:16 is sort of similar. Holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. So the first step is to determine we're going to finish this race well. The second is to realize, we could lose if we don't keep our doctrine straight. Here's the third piece, the discipline necessary. You knew we'd get to that, right? The discipline necessary to do this race. Like probably the classic passage on it is 1 Corinthians 9:24, where Paul says, do you not know that in a race all runners run? Well, duh. But only one receives the prize. Don't give me this stuff about everybody wins and we'll all give you a trophy for participant. Stop. You're hurting kids' self-esteem with that. So, only one receives the prize. Run so you may obtain it. That sounds like discipline to me. And the classic passage might be Hebrews chapter 12, where the Hebrew writer says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, well, who's that? Is that the people in chapter 11? Is that some kind of heavenly? I don't know. He says, let us also lay aside every weight. Now, the next phrase is, and sin which clings so closely. Do we have an example here of what's called epexegetical or appositional phrase? Does the second phrase define the first phrase? Or do we have two things? Is it that we need to lay aside our sins? And the other thing might be every weight. Those could be good things, I suppose. Well, track and field these days, forgive me, Patty, but sometimes these days the participants need to dress a little better. Some of the dress in track seems so risque to me. But I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to lay aside anything that would hinder them from, maybe you need to lay aside something really good that would hinder you. It takes discipline. And then, of course, lay aside the sin, which so closely clings. And he says, let us run with endurance the race that's set before us, looking to Jesus. That will always help you in the race. The founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God. Isn't that a wonderful passage of Scripture? To look to Christ. And here's the little cheating I'm going to do. I'm going to put an Old Testament text inside the New Testament cluster. It's Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, verse 11. Again, I say that under the sun, now whenever the preacher says that in Ecclesiastes, he means if you look at the world without God in the equation, under the sun, just looking at life without God in the picture. Again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift. It isn't a sprint. I'm glad you could sprint. Okay. Sprints for me seem like distance. But the race is not to the swift because it might be that the turtle will win over the rabbit. No, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those who have knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. This is that seemingly, I don't think it's seeming for me, but seemingly a negative, pessimistic view of life. Actually, I think Solomon is looking at life as a scientific experiment. And what he's saying is, it doesn't make any sense if you just look at it under the sun. The race is not always the swift who run. Now, it's just this year, I don't know how many years, Patty, that your record stood in the what event? 200? And yet that record was broken just this year. Now, no offense, but she's not a spring chicken. And just think how long that record stood in place. The race is not always, somebody broke it just this year from her record at Missouri Southern. Well, anyway, that's a New Testament cluster. Let me go to an Old Testament cluster. Let me give you some passages of Scripture that the Old Testament speaks about this. And Psalm 71 has a couple verses in this regard that I like quite a bit. Psalm 71 verse 9 says, "Do not cast me off in the time of my old age." When we get old, do we really want to be, yeah, well, you're just old. Why don't you just sit over there? "Forsake me not when my strength is spent." Just because we're old, we have nothing to offer? Really? Psalm 71 verse 18 says, "So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come." Don't let me die, God, before I give the baton to somebody else. I know you won't like how I worded this next one. I was trying to represent what the text actually says. I talk about burping on your kids. Now, I know that sounds bad, but actually it's what the Hebrew word this is a quotation later in the book of Mark when Jesus is talking about parables. And this passage, Psalm 78 verses 2, "I will open my mouth," says the psalmist, "in a parable. I will utter." You know what that word means? I will belch. I will burp it forth. So I'm calling you to burp on your kids. I'm calling you to somehow say to them things like, "I will utter the dark things from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but to tell the coming generation of the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders he has done." Terry and Carol Bolin were here this morning. We may have talked to Terry. He just got back from Sturgis. Y'all know what I mean by Sturgis? 700,000 Harley Davidsons. Can you imagine? There's only 700,000 people in Dakota, South Dakota. They had 700,000 people. He goes every year. He gets all these great evangelistic stories. He actually told of a church that the church supported a missionary in Africa whose name was Bertha, and they put in the church whose name was, did I get that right? Bertha? No, I don't think that is right. Anyway, they said, come, her name was Bertha Belch. And the way the bulletin had it was, Terry told me this, "Come here, Bertha Belch, all the way from Africa." Well, that's a little unfortunate. Burping on your kids, the glorious deeds of the Lord. We'll go on to one more, and then I want to make this application. What about the love of God? What about passing on the love of God? Like teaching, sitting, walking, writing. The famous passage after it says in verse 4 of Deuteronomy 6, "Shema, O Israel, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love him with everything. Then it says, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets, phylacteries. Between your eyes you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Are you getting the picture? The picture is that we do everything we possibly can to successfully, without dropping this, pass the baton of faith to the next generation. So, how can we do that well? I'd like to give you 3 ways we can do that well, and then illustrate it with 3 examples. Here's the first way we do this well. Number 1, we set a good example by having an authentic faith. I can tell you this with working with college students for 35 years. The millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha, maybe even the Xers, let me back up a little bit. They can smell a hypocrite from a mile away. And the only way that this will make any sense is that somehow they've got to see a real example of an authentic faith. What did Paul say in 1 Corinthians 11:1? Imitate me as I imitate Christ. Mimetai, the Greek word from which we get the English word mimic. Mimic so others can follow. Set a good example by having an authentic faith. Here's the second one. I'm going to land here for a few minutes. The second one that we can do to pass is becoming generationally alert and give the youth wings. That's pretty hard to do sometimes. Because, as I had to remind the faculty from time to time at Ozark Christian College, you don't let the inmates run the prison. It's not very complimentary to tell college students they're inmates, but no, children don't know what they need. We have to tell them what. But there does come a point when you have to release it. So, I brought with me tonight a little book that Tommy Eves and I read through together some time back. And it's called Generational IQ by Hayden Shaw. Just happens to be the son of Dr. Wayne Shaw. And Hayden is so sharp on this stuff. But here's why a book like this matters. He tries to trace the characteristics of the builder generation and the best generation, the boomer generation, and the Xers, like our boys, and the millennials, like our girls, and then Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha. He doesn't even talk about Gen Alpha because he wrote this before they were born. Here's the challenge. We have 6 generations going to church together right now. Have you thought about what that means? 6 generations of people going to church in the same church. And I got news for you in case you don't know. The younger generations feel differently about some things. I think I've told you before. Our daughter Annie, that we're asking you to pray for, she goes to Tulsa tomorrow to talk with a specialist about the enzyme level in her liver because it's high. She was born in 1984. That's the first year that the millennials came about. And I mentioned Terry Bolin a minute ago. When Terry was in a faculty meeting one time, when those kids got to be their freshmen in college, so just do 1984, add 18. And that's when they came to school. And Terry Bolin sat in our faculty meeting and said, I'm telling you, this freshman class is different. And I thought, pfft. And the rest of the faculty thought, pfft. Terry, Confucius said, like he cared, Confucius said that kids are just kids at any generation. He said, no, these kids came out of Christian school and Christian service camp and vacation Bible school, but they think of truth different than 6 weeks into the semester, nobody was laughing at Terry Bolin. These were kids out of our churches. These were good kids. Some have been homeschooled, some at Christian school, and yet they were saying things and acting in ways like, you think capital T truth is like negotiable? What's wrong with you? George Barna says that the millennial generation and Gen Z and Gen Alpha have very high levels of loneliness, and they feel isolated, and they're very uncertain about the future. Do you know what people that are older that will come alongside of that millennial or Gen Z or Gen Alpha person and tell them, as somebody who's wizened, somebody who's got wise years behind them, we can help them with the comfort level. We can say, listen, honey, I know you're uncertain. I know what the stock market looks like. I know what they're telling you about Social Security not being there for you. I'm just saying that God will be with us every step of the way. Let me illustrate this even a little bit more. We mentioned to our elders and deacons today, and the staff has been working on this for some time, that a week from this coming Tuesday is called the Ozark Christian College Expo. What that means is that organizations in town like Souls Harbor and Cross Lines and the churches in the area and the American Red Cross and all, they come to the gymnasium, they put up little booths, and they try to get the students to sign up to come help, because the students have to, they got to do some hours of Christian service, so they try to enlist them in these things. It's a good thing. So we go to put our Park Plaza name out there. And we thought, well, what could get their attention? What can attract them? I know, Cinnabons. Everybody loves Cinnabons. We had one at noon today. Everybody loves these things. I mean, come on. So Larry, bless his heart, went down to talk to the Schlotzsky's guy here on 32nd and Main. And he said, we got this little thing going on, and we wonder, would you be willing to donate? And he met us halfway. He donated his half, and we purchased these. We had these Cinnabons, and those college kids came by, and, oh, I don't eat those. Do you need your head examined? What do you mean you don't eat these? These are delicious. If I'd been instituting the Lord's Supper, it would have been Diet Coke and Cinnabons. What are you talking about? No, we go to Starbucks, and we have lattes. Like that's going to fill you up. Anyway, we missed it by a country mile. Listen, we brought those back to the church. The staff was eating them for months, which may explain several things. But anyway, are you crazy college kids? Don't you know what's good for you? The next year, we took bags of popcorn they could use in their microwaves. They get free popcorn at the student center. You know what it takes to become generationally alert and give youth wings? You've got to think like them. You have to think not what I want, but what do they need? Not what, Lita, I heard Brother Wilson say, sometimes we're more interested in what we want to say than what they need to hear. So, be generational. Here's the third thing. Plan to surrender your leadership, so hold it lightly. Every one of us has a shelf life. Every one of us will only run our leg of the race, and then we'll pass the baton. So learn as we get older to hold things a little lightly, because we may just find in 65 years from this November, if Jesus tarries, they might not do church like we do today. They might not like. So what's all that look like? Let me give you 3 random areas very quickly to kind of think through in this regard. Here's the first. What if in 65 years, the people of Park Plaza Christian Church, whoever's here then, and I suppose we could have somebody here. Rachel Dunn, if you don't know, is pregnant. So we're going to have a baby at Park Plaza pretty soon. What if that little person could be here? Perhaps a little girl, I think they told me. But first area would be church polity. Let's just talk about church polity. That means the governance of the church. We're a non-denominational, autonomous, self-governing outfit. Okay? And the Bible says that every good church needs, overseers and servants, elders and deacons, shepherds and servants. That's what we read in the New Testament. There's not one word in the New Testament about a ministerial staff. So what if 65 years from now, the elders and the deacons of this congregation come and say, we're going to be like that Littleton Bible Chapel in Littleton, Colorado, and we're just going to have the elders and the deacons do everything. So we're going to remark, we're going to get rid of Larry, because they're in wheelchairs and walkers by this point. And we're not going to have any support staff. We're going to just, folks, there's nothing in the Bible about that. Elders and deacons, that seems to matter, but church staff, how to think about church. And what about this? Selection of leaders. In November, on the 19th, we will gather as a congregation, and we'll select our leaders for 2026. And you'll be involved in that. But how to select leaders is all over the map in the New Testament. In the case of Jesus, he just handpicked them. In the case of Paul, he appointed them. In Acts 6, they selected them. But I don't see any blueprint in the New Testament about how to do that. In our church, we can, and Gordon Brenforder would know this, but after we followed Gordon Brenforder in our little student ministry back in the 1970s at Granby, they voted on everything. They voted on who would be the church organist. Hopefully it's somebody who can play it. I'm not making this up. And right before we got there, Jenny Howe fell and broke her wrist. She was the church organist. She won every year, the election. So guess who got to play? She had to start playing the organ. Because Jenny was... Now, listen, when you're a church of just a small number, you can do that. I mentioned Jeff Vines this morning, San Dimas, California. Thousands and thousands of people go to that church. Do you think really they could have an election from the church body to select their leaders? That doesn't work. What about that? What about a board? There's nothing in the Bible about a board. What about congregational meetings? There's nothing in the Bible about. So my first example is, will they do something different than we do it? About church polity, maybe. How about this? Outreach. How about outreach? There was a time when if you wore out your shoe leather as a preacher, you could help a church grow. You could go down the street and knock on doors cold turkey, like I did when I turned into that driveway that day, because I saw the word church on the mailbox. And Melinda Church answered the door. And I said, I'm Mark Scott. I've driven by several times. I've seen your name. Is that your name on the mailbox? Is your name really Church? She said, yeah. Do you go to church anywhere? She said, no, but we've been talking about it. She said, where do you go? I said, well, just down the road a little bit. I don't do that anymore. You know why? Because we've taken the front porches off and we built privacy fences in the backyard. It's a cultural thing. But now you're under surveillance. You ring the doorbell. Okay. I did get a speeding ticket in Hartsburg, Illinois one time. I'm sorry. It's just a different world. What about, they tell me that planting new churches is still one of the most effective ways to reach people for Christ. But in Iowa, where I grew up, there were a few flagship churches. First Christian in Council Bluffs, that was a big one. Clinton, Iowa, Grinnell, Iowa. Now, the Antioch Church in Marion, Iowa, Cedar Rapids area, that's a big one. Webster City, Iowa, where Dad had 2 ministries. But the guy I lived with for the summer, I mentioned this morning, to working on the DOT for doing asphalt at a gravel pit, he said, when the church gets to be 200, they need to plant a new church. That's too big. That was the mindset. And there'll be people that will think that way and other people that. So I guess what I'm saying is, how does this even relate to buildings? As you know, we have drawings about parking lots and an atrium that would let us sit down. Last week at the ice cream social, you really like ice cream, don't you? 193 people. Marshall tells us that the fellowship hall will seat 144, and that's pressing it for the fire marshal. So what's that mean? And what about a new worship center? What's that? I don't know what all that means. I just know we have to think through those issues. Here's a third area, and you knew I'd come to this: music. In the mornings when I leave the YMCA to go home and get ready for the day, I listen to NPR. Some of you are thinking, we knew you had a problem. Okay, I balance it in the evening by watching Fox. So, you get both sides. But when NPR is announcing what classical music they'll play later in the day, they give this little line: all music was new once. It's true. So where's that go? I don't know. I'm not sure. We've chosen a preference style here at Park Plaza, and I think that to leverage it is a good thing. Our leaders asked me about that when we came, and I thought, no, we grew up in the church. We like it all. But what if in 65 years, what if the kids say, well, that's not what we're going to do? Well, I guarantee you, though there's no recordings that I know of Thomas and Alexander Campbell and Barton W. Stone and Walter Scott singing in the early days of our heritage in the 1800s. Tom Lawson played some singing, a cappella singing for the Appalachian Mountains where he grew up that was probably very similar to what Alexander and Thomas Campbell sang. And it's really high tone, and it's a cappella, and it's really, really different than what we sing today. So what about that? Well, let me wind this up. You know the line, methods are many, principles are few. Methods always change, principles never do. What we've got to do is ensure that we pass this well. If the next generation runs the race a little different than we do, we'll just have to rejoice if the gospel is taking new ground. Leighton Ford was Billy Graham's brother-in-law, and he said his fear for the church would be that it would change its message but not change its methods. And that's just the opposite of what we should do. We must never, ever change the message. Amen? And as long from my watch, we are not going to. The gospel will still be the gospel here. But methods, what do we say about methods? See, the gospel has not changed, but the world in which we share it has, in case you haven't noticed. So, how well do we do in the exchange zone? How do we do well in the exchange zone? Can I give you a good answer? I've thought about this quite a bit. Let me give you a good answer. I don't know. I really don't know. And that's why I'm glad that we can share in elders meetings and board meetings and other kinds of meetings, that staff meetings, all kinds of things. Well, where are we going? The baton I have is really a baton. It is given to us as a gift to the church. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin which so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. And over on the side is CIY. Some of us went out to the opening night of the first CIY conference this year. The lights were hard on Cataract Carla. The music was loud for even old deaf ears. But I watched those kids from up in the balcony worshiping Jesus. I thought, boy, church is going to look different when I'm dead and gone. They had 72,000 students in the conferences this summer. Let's pass this well.
I suppose that most of you have already taken that baton of faith, but if there's somebody here tonight who hasn't, we would sure love to sit down with you and look at what the Bible says that the baton looks like. And I suspect most of us have accepted that baton. I would like us to recommit to be intentional in how what we're going to do. We've had some great suggestions and ideas. what we're going to do with that baton of faith between now and even November. Let us pray together.